Je vous invite juste à rester
This microphone
si vous avez
working.
2
I
minutes.
invite you
Car
to
c'est
remain
quelque
if
chose
you
de
have
très
2
important ce
minutes,
soir.
2 more minutes,
On a
because
les
it's a very
protagonistes du film que vous venez
important
de voir et je pense
thing. We
qu'ils
have all the
méritent
protagonists of the
un très
film,
très grand
and they
applaudissement.
deserve
Voilà,
a
si vous
big
pouviez leur faire une
applause.
ovation. Céline,
Thank you very much. Céline,
Ramadan, Rio.
Ramadan,
Voilà.
Rabei. Thank you for them. It's very important. They have been doing a hell of a work, and thank you for the applause.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir à tous.
Good evening.
Je m'appelle Caroline
My name is Caroline Aboussada. I'm the director of SOS Mediterranean Switzerland, who tried to rescue the migrants with its ship close to the Libyan coasts. Just in order to start and in order to get some to breathe after the emotions of this film. If you count the people you rescue on this boat, you have more and more women who are pregnant, and all the statements on Aquarius are statements of rape, torture, and bad treatments for months, for years. And we have also as nationalities, we have citizenships of Libya. So you have more and more Libyan coming on trying to escape the country. And second thing I wanted to add is that you have very little access to these detention centers inside of the country, and it's very difficult. Just when you have people giving their testimonies and giving the information, it's very difficult to be informed about what is happening there. It's more difficult to help the people and to give them some rest, to comfort them or to bring them some hope. And third thing I wanted to say is that you have a European policy presently, and Switzerland is part of it by financing the Libyan coast guards, and is to pull the people back to Libya and this detention center. So we know that. We will not be able to say later that we didn't know. You have people putting their life at risk just to have access to this documentation and information. And it's also a collective responsibility to give this information and to explain what is happening. So I'm going to introduce the different persons. Before introducing, I just want to talk about logistics. We have 5 panelists, and we have somebody who is going to make the translation. And we have translators, interpreters. We will have French, English, and Arabic. And I would like to thank the interpreters, because usually we speak too quickly. So I would like to ask everybody, and ask it from myself, to speak as calmly as possible and as slowly as possible, so that the translation can be done well.
l'interprétation en anglais fonctionne?
Does the interpretation into English work? It seems that it doesn't work, although the interpreter is translating. The interpreter is translating. I wanted you to start speaking. So we have a problem. We have Cécile Allegra, who is the director of this movie, and as we said it before, it's not her first experience in this festival, and she was awarded a prize last time. She was awarded a prize in London, and you have been working on this topic for many years. And could you tell us how you had the idea of shooting such a film? How did you meet all the protagonists? Explain us a bit the beginnings of this film.
Le niveau du micro est un peu bas. On va parler près du micro.
I hope the microphone's okay. I think I'll speak closely to the mic. Yes, it's a long story. I met Céline just after I'd finished the film Voyage en Barbarie, which talked about human trafficking in the Horn of Africa, where migrants were systematically tortured. And I was in two minds about whether to act, but I knew that something had to be done. So I was just looking for a way of ensuring that the testimonies that I collected could have an impact or could lead to legal proceedings. And so someone said to me, well, you really must go and see Céline, because she created the NGO We Are Not Weapons of War. And she's an activist, and she's fighting the use of rape in war. And what intrigued me at the time was the fact that rape was being used systematically in migrant camps. We talked about this for some time, and we gradually realized that we had to make a film about this. It's such an important subject. People aren't aware of the issue, and some people think that rape might be the least of people's worries in war, but I can assure you that that's not the case. It's a terrible weapon of war in contemporary conflicts. So we got down to work, and we didn't know how to begin. And I can tell you that for 6 months I kept on getting knocked back. I found it very difficult to start making this film. I think it was the first time I'd experienced that. I got through 19 fixers in Libya. And for migrants, everyone was willing to talk about that topic. But as soon as we started talking about rape perpetrated by Libyans on other Libyans, then no one wanted to help me. Everyone hung up the phone, refused to speak, and I was getting increasingly desperate. In September 2016, I was on the point of giving up because I just thought it wasn't going to be possible. And I know it's not easy to watch that film, but it's important, and I wondered, in Libya, it's a very special situation. There has been 40 years of dictatorship, an awful dictatorship, and the country is now emerging from that dictatorship. Even after the revolution, people remain very inward-looking. The country was ignored by the international community to a certain extent, but people were also determined to get the country up and running again of their own accord and demonstrate that they could do it themselves. So we've reached this situation where it's very difficult for people to speak out in this country that is very closed and where talking about these issues is very difficult. It was a real challenge for me. So I was wondering, what do they need? They need access to healthcare. I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't provide that. They also need access to someone who can listen to them. They need therapy. psychological support. Culturally, that's very rare, and it's even very risky. And so I realized that nothing was possible within the country, because no one could go to see a doctor and say, look, my back's hurting, could you also look a little bit lower down? It's just something that wouldn't be done. And now, as you've seen the film, you'll understand that anyone who admits to have been raped is immediately ostracized, excluded from society. And that goes for women and men. Women don't participate actively in politics, though, whereas men do. So when they are raped, they are no longer capable of speaking out in public, because they know that someone somewhere will know that they've been raped. And as you've seen in this film, they bear with them the physical scars of rape. Even years later, they will never be able to deny that they were raped. So, I did something very unusual, something I never tried before. I said, well, I'm going to use breathing techniques when we try to help people in conflicts. I'm sure many of you know about this, but we try to learn how to breathe. And earlier during the revolution, I don't know whether he was doing that, but it's a technique that you can use, breathing techniques, to try to calm yourself down, to try to lower the heart rate, to try to relax during moments of extreme tension. And it's quite a simple thing that we can do. It's easy to learn and to teach to some people. And so I translated a little guidebook for Western people who are stressed at work, and I translate that into Arabic, and I got it secretly into Libya. And it seemed to work, because talking with the only person remaining who was willing to speak to me, talking about victims in their solitude, this therapy was actually helping. Because after 5 years have gone by, you get to a state where you can't speak to anybody about this, and victims are describing the same symptoms, they're just in torment. They can't speak to their family about this. They can't have usual social relations. They say, well, I can't even talk to my friends anymore. And I just have the impression that everyone knows what happened to me. And that's what many victims were saying. And I started getting some luck and getting some people out who were talking to me through this technique. And then I realized that someone else in Libya was working on these issues. And that's how I met Ramadan and Imad, who you saw in the film. They worked behind the scenes, in secret, as you've seen, and they trusted me, which was really difficult to achieve, actually, because trust is so fragile, and you really need to build on it, work on it. And Ramadan, we'll talk about this, but Ramadan has a priority, and that is justice in their country. So when someone comes from abroad, it's difficult to trust them. Will they actually respect the testimonies? Will they really understand what's being said to them? Will they not betray me? These are questions that people legitimately ask when a foreigner comes in. And then we started to see victims and started to get some people talking. Yassim confirmed the rape in 2011. And that's what I was looking for at the outset. I wanted to prove that there were rapes during the revolution. And Ahmed, who you also saw, was a total surprise to us. When he started telling us that he'd been in prison for 4 years, that there were 450 of them, and he was washing the dishes so he could count the number of plates in there, so he knows how many men were in that prison. I, for a moment, thought to myself, have I really heard correctly? Because the brain tells you that just can't be true. I think you can all know what I'm saying. Sometimes when someone tells you something so tremendous.
Alors, j'avais mon petit joker.
You just don't want to believe it.
Vert, là,
And my joker here to my left,
Je l'ai
dressed in
appelée
green,
Céline.
I called her up, I called
Je lui ai
Céline
dit,
Bardet
écoute,
up,
je crois que vraiment là,
and I said, look, I think
il y a quelque chose
here
de
we've really got
grave
something,
qui se passe.
something
La première chose
terrible
qu'elle m'a dit,
that has happened.
j'oublierai
And
jamais,
the first thing she
c'est,
said to me was,
c'est pas parce que c'est toi
just
que je
because
dirais
it's
qu'il y a
you,
quelque chose s'il n'y a rien.
I'm not going to say that I found something if we haven't found something. So you better be sure. And then she came and met Ramadan and Imad, who were finding it difficult to get the documentation together. And so that's how you saw that we stayed together. We went through these different stages of the process together. And we started to realize that we were seeing war crimes that had never been reported before. And for me, this is the very first time in my life, and I hope it will be the last.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to change the order. We'll give the floor to Céline. You are an international lawyer, you are an investigator, you have set up an ONG to you have been working with the ICC and with the United Nations, and you have started investigated in 2011 on Libya, and you created this NGO, We Are Not Weapons of War, a few years ago. And tell us the continuation of this story. You said you... So I don't remember having said that, but I never remember anything. Actually, it's also the difference between the lawyer and another person. It's to see how a case is being built up within the legal system, and this legal system requires more than just testimonies. It's something which is very complicated to set up. That's for the reason that I said that. And then I started in 2011 to work on Libya, and I'm working on war crimes for a long time, so rape is a war weapon, and one starts really to speak about it now. And I didn't have this idea of creating these NGOs because it's just a hell to create such an institution, and it asks a lot of energy of you. It drains lots of energy of you. But first it was a campaign, and as Cécile rightly said, I was very surprised to see that the people wouldn't understand what is war rape. And there was a gender approach. It was very often linked to the right of the women, and rape as a weapon is not a gender issue. It's the issue of a tool. And I think the film shows that even a doctor who doesn't know anything on war rape, he says everything. So then I started to work in Libya in 2011, and when I arrived in the country, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect to have in front of me this question of rapes, although I had been working on that for years. So it struck me. And then, at that time, you had the Minister of Justice, who is a fantastic man. This is Salam Argani. I met him then, and he contacted me later, and because I had built up a unity of war crimes in Bosnia before, because you think that justice is complicated. Yes, it's complicated, but you have a certain of proceedings who have to be done in a more simple way. And this is what I done. I had a bill adopted because the victims of rape were not recognized as war victims. So I had this law adopted in Bosnia, which has been after that taken in many promulgated in many countries. And so this Minister of Justice said, can't I do that in my country? So he wrote this law, and it's a pioneer law in this part of the world because it recognized the mass rapes, and it allowed to set up a commission to approach all these issues. As you have seen, Libya is a problem. You had the fall of the government in 2014, but nevertheless it was adopted in form of a decree, and which is very important. And after that, I met Cécile, and then we met the other persons, and we are doing this job. And the film shows the beginning of our work, which is very important. And the important thing to say, I don't know if you understand it well, you have a great thing. The ICC is competent in this area. So there is an opening in the ICC, and you have to seize the opportunity and to work on that. And you have many other paths also we can speak about afterwards.
So what stage have we reached now? You were talking about the International Criminal Court and how they had started to consider this case in August 2017, and arrest warrants were being issued. Yes, for the for the tribunal for Libya, there are a number of charges. One referring to rape. The issue of rape used in a widespread and systematic way as a weapon of war hasn't yet been examined. In fact, what I hope to do with We Are Not Weapons of War is to bring that issue up as rape being used as a weapon of war in Libya, and get that considered by the International Criminal Court. There are charges out there. We're talking about individual criminal responsibility in the context of the ICC. So you need to identify the people, you need to identify the perpetrators, but also those who gave the orders for this. And I think you can see that in the film. You can see that it's not just a coincidence that all of these people were raped in the same way. There were planned methods. A similar method was seen pretty much everywhere and was used by all of these perpetrators. That's what's new about this situation, or at least unusual about this situation in Libya. I've been in the field for many years. I'm tired myself. I've come now back from the tribal areas of Pakistan, and it's very moving for me to see this film again. And I'm thinking of Ahmad, who's not here tonight, when I see it. So I'm sorry, I can't remember what I was saying now. Oh yes, we need to identify individual criminal responsibility, and then you also need to identify who gave the orders. And you can see that there was a system in place. There were orders being given, and that's what you need to identify. That's what we're trying to do now. We're moving through this process. It's not easy because it's very difficult to get into the field. I think it's going to get even more and more difficult as time goes by. But we work from abroad, and we try to use people who are there in the field, and we use new technologies to do that. And we can talk about this later. But we are not weapons of war. We just don't have the funds either to move on with this process. So we also need the funds. And it's true that we could be tabling these complaints by the end of the year or 2019.
I would like to insist on this point. I don't know if you hear me. Yes, it works. Okay. What I discovered while working on this issue was the loneliness of people like Céline, Ramadan or Ahmad to make progress on these cases. You have only seen the result, but the path is long and lonely. You give money to Doctors Without Borders or other institutions, and you have the feeling that an institution works and finally it arrives. But the battle on the ground, the fact of getting close to the victims is a very long battle, and we have come to a time where the victims do not trust anymore the great institution. So you have a kind of pioneers of a new system which is unfinanced up to now. So it's a system which is being reinvented, and this is what I understood also while working with Céline, Ramadan, and Imad. Imad, I just wanted to give you some news from him. He is near of Tawarga, and he waits for the possibilities for his people to come back into the city. Thank you.
Du coup, on va passer à Ramadan.
So let's turn to Ramadan,
Qui est donc défenseur des droits de
who
l'homme,
is a human rights defender,
piloté un peu aussi cette enquête.
who was directing this investigation to a certain extent. Just to pick up from what Cécile was saying, how is this work taking place now? Your daily investigation work, trying to find information, find people from Tunisia, traveling backwards and forwards. Could you describe it for us?
Et Ramadan va parler en arabe et on
And Ramadan is going to speak Arabic, and we'll have the interpretation in consecutive mode.
في البداية كويس لك. في البداية شكرا للجميع ومساء الخير. في الحقيقة الأمر أكثر صعوبة وأكثر دقة من الآلية اللي شرح بها في الفيلم، بالإضافة إلى العمل أكثر شمولية من الطريقة اللي شرح بها في الفيلم. طويلة كويس. أنا راح أستخدم عبارة ذكرت في الفيلم. كل ما شاهدتوه هو عبارة عن بداية فقط، بداية لعمل يحتاج إلى وقت طويل وفريق كبير جدا من العمل. أنا حابب نوضح نقطة رئيسية. أنا مش محقق، أنا كنت وكيل نيابة في السابق، وأنا حقيقة مدافع عن حقوق الإنسان بمعنى الدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان، وعملي هو محاولة إيصال الضحايا للعدالة ومحاسبة المنتهكين أيا كان نوعهم وأيا كانوا موجودين ومهما كان توجههم السياسي أو منطقة وجودهم، باختلاف العملية اللي موجودة في ليبيا معقدة جدا. يعني لو تحدثنا على شرق أو غرب أو جنوب مش راح أخوض في تفاصيل، ولكن نقطة مهمة حبيت أني نوه لها.
On va faire la traduction.
Translation, please.
M'entendez?
Do you hear me?
Bonsoir à toutes et à tous.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank you
d'être venu aujourd'hui.
for being here.
J'aimerais tout simplement dire que la situation
say
est
that the
beaucoup plus
situation
difficile
is even
et
more
délicate
difficult and complex
que l'on pourrait croire.
as one can
Et elle
think.
est même beaucoup plus difficile
It's
que dans le
even
film.
more
Le
difficult
travail
than
est
you have
gigantesque
seen in the
et
film.
tout ce
The
qu'on a
work is
vu,
huge,
d'après
and
ce qui a été
everything
dit dans le film,
which
tout
you
ce
have
qu'on a
seen
vu,
in the
ce n'est qu'un
film,
début.
it's
Nous
only
avons
a
besoin
beginning.
de beaucoup de
We
temps, nous avons
need
besoin de
much more
mobiliser des
time.
gens.
We have to mobilize
Et, je
people.
tiens à rappeler
And
aussi
I
que
would
je
like
ne
to
suis pas un
remind you
enquêteur,
also,
j'ai
I am not
été
an
procureur
investigator.
général
I was
par le
general
passé,
attorney
mais je suis
in
un
the past,
défenseur
but I
des
am
droits
a
humains. Mon
defender
travail
of
consiste
human
à
rights,
aider
and
les
my
victimes
work
à
is
lancer un
helping the
processus
victims to
judiciaire
launch
et
a legal
essayer de
procedure
poursuivre en justice
in
les
order to
criminels
put
et
charges
ceux qui ont,
against
commis
the
ces
criminals
actes et
and those who
ces
committed
exactions.
those abuses and
Et,
those
comme le film
crimes.
l'a
And
montré,
as the
comme on
film
l'a déjà
has
dit,
shown,
la
as it
situation
was
est très
already said, the
difficile.
situation is very difficult in Libya.
العمل في حقيقته ينقسم إلى شقين رئيسيين، شق تقني فني وشق ميداني. الجانب الميداني هو متصل بالأبطال الحقيقيين، المدافعين الحقيقيين اللي موجودين على الأرض، اللي قابلوا في الضحايا، اللي يجمعوا في الدليل، وينتقل العمل إلى الشق التقني الفني اللي هي محاولة جمع الأدلة وخلق منها صورة قانونية بالإمكان استخدامها كدليل قانوني يحال إلى الجهة القضائية. وهنا لازم أعيد وأحيي عماد، لأن عماد هو البطل الحقيقي في هذه القصة. هو فعلا البطل الحقيقي، هو حاليا موجود في ليبيا في مخيم على حدود المدينة المهجر منها من 7 سنوات. ما اكتفش بالعمل من الخارج، رجع للأرض وموجود على الأرض ويقدم في المساعدة بشكل مباشر.
Et le travail, en fait,
The work, actually,
est scindé en deux parties.
is
Il y a
divided
le
into
côté
two
technique,
parts. You have the technical
et il y
part,
a le
and you
côté
have
du terrain.
also
Mais tout
the
commence par le
field
terrain,
part.
bien
But everything
évidemment.
starts with the
Les
field
gens
part,
qui
of
rencontrent
course,
les
because the
victimes,
people
qui
who are
se
meeting the
chargent de
victims,
rassembler les
who are
différentes
collecting
preuves et
the
les
different
témoignages. Ensuite vient le côté
evidences
technique,
and testimonies.
ce
And then you have
côté,
this technical
consiste
aspect,
à lancer le
which
processus
consists
judiciaire, à
in
essayer de
launching
faire usage de
criminal
toutes les
procedure
preuves au
and
niveau,
to use all the
juridique.
evidences
Et
which
à
were
ce propos,
collected.
j'aimerais saluer
And
Emad, c'est
I
le
would
vrai
like
héros de
to
ce film. Il se
pay a
trouve
tribute to
actuellement en
Emad,
Libye, dans
the
un camp
real
sur les
hero
frontières
of this film.
de sa
He
ville
is in a
natale.
camp on the borders of
Il ne
his
s'est pas contenté de faire un travail à distance,
town
mais il est revenu
where
sur
he
le
was
terrain
born.
et il essaie autant que
He
possible
is
de fournir
to
son assistance.
come back on the field to give his help as much as possible.
كل ما تم مشاهدته في الفيلم من عنف ومن انتهاكات هي عبارة عن حلقة من انتهاكات ممتدة على مدار أكثر من 5 عقود تقريبا. سبب العنف الموجود هو عنف أساسا كان موجود في السابق، مش هو سبب الرئيسي ولكن هو كان أحد أهم الأسباب، لأن دائرة العنف لا تولد إلا عنف. لو لاحظنا أن جزء من الأشخاص اللي موجودين في الفيلم هم كانوا ضحايا في مرحلة من المراحل، بس مش هم بأنفسهم، قد يكون الجهات اللي ينتموا لها فيما بعد ارتكبوا انتهاكات. ونحن الآن في ليبيا في مرحلة هي مرحلة انتقال من عنف إلى عنف آخر. يجب أن تكون الخطوة التالية هي محاولة إيقاف العنف بأي شكل من الأشكال. والطريقة الرئيسية وأهم آليات إيقاف العنف هو المحاسبة. المحاسبة هي المفتاح الرئيسي في ليبيا في الوقت الحالي. كل ما يحدث من انتهاكات، كل ما يحدث من فظائع على الأرض يحدث بمنأى تماما عن أي إحساس من المنتهكين بأنها ستطالهم المحاسبة يوم من الأيام. كل ما يحدث هم أشخاص باختلاف انتماءاتهم، باختلاف توجهاتهم السياسية، باختلاف قوتهم العسكرية أو مناطق وجودهم، يرتكبوا في الانتهاكات بمنأى كامل عن المحاسبة. اللي نحن نحاول نقوم به هو مجرد وضع حجرة أساس فقط. ما أعتقدش أن نحن في القريب العاجل رح نحقق المحاسبة على كل الانتهاكات في ليبيا، لكن نحن في مرحلة وضع الحجرة الأولى أو القاعدة الرئيسية اللي ممكن غيرنا أو شركائنا أو فاعلين آخرين ممكن أن ينضموا لنا أو ننضم لهم أو نوحدوا الجهود للوصول إلى المحاسبة في المرحلة التالية.
All we have been watching in the film, all the violence, all the human rights violations are in a bigger frame of a general violence which has been taken place during 5 decades, and it has its origin in all what happens in these decades, the past decades, and the violence is also a vicious circle, and very often the criminals are themselves abused and are victims of their institution who are responsible for these abuses and these human rights violations. But the next step must be to stop this, to put an end to the impunity and to make accountable the people. But unfortunately all the abuses and violations are not seen because those who are committing those crimes know that they will never be put to trial, and those persons belong to different political factions and come from all sides. So there is no accountability. And this is the thing we are trying to change presently. We are trying to put a base in order to put those persons to trials. I don't know that we maybe will not reach our aim, but we are trying to set up a base so that later other actors can go on with the work.
Thank you. Throughout the film, we see how difficult things are in Libya with the institutions that are in place. For as long as there is no accountability for these crimes, we see that it's going to be very difficult to see reconciliation and state building. You are a producer of a series of BBC films or programs, El Cool Libya, and you know the situation in Libya very well. What is happening at the moment, and how do you see the possibility or impossibility of state building, given what's been going on?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to extend the same thank you as Ramadan to all of you guys for showing interest in our case. And of course, I would like to thank Cécile for the incredible work that she has done in this film. Where do I start? Well, Ramadan kind of summed it up when he said that the situation is quite complicated. I think there are, let's say, 4 axes to our problem. The first one being the political and the security issue. Now we have 2 parliaments and we have 2 governments. The country is technically split into 2. And that, of course, affects our security situation. And because it's split and because we don't have a unified army, of course, everybody is afraid for their lives. And this, of course, affected the economic situation. So now you have all the bigger businessmen are reluctant to put their money in the banks, and of course you see that the Libyan dinar has fallen incredibly compared to the dollars. Our oil exports have stopped because of the whole ISIS situation in Sirte. So the economic situation made things even worse. And if you take a couple steps back, you look at the media landscape, we have that polarized media, so 2 fractions are supporting 2 different bodies and 2 entities. And of course, this has its toll on the people. I'm not going to do the newsy part and talk about the whole every little detail in the Libyan situation, but it's quite complicated. Now we're talking about how can we move forward from this. Well, without transitional justice, there will never be reconciliation. And of course, Ramadan kind of stated that every single person in Libya today, including myself when I go there, can do any type of crime and can literally go away with it. And I think that's the biggest issue, because now you have people who were subjected to violence, people who want to prove themselves to their superiors, and you have all of those random militias all over the country. All of this adds to the daily kidnapping and the daily theft, and of course, with the economic situation being so bad, things get worse and worse. But without applying the rule of law in the country, because you have written law, but it's not being applied. And another issue, which is that the politicians do not really represent anyone on the ground. All of those bodies that we have do not really represent the people. And another problem is the fact that we don't have this public movement. The people themselves, the Libyan people, they've been so afraid recently, especially after what happened in 2014. It's been very difficult to get a public opinion about something and kind of push for it. So this is only one of many problems that we have. And of course, Cécile kind of talked about how the international community kind of took a step back and thought, well, now that we've toppled Muammar Gaddafi, then of course the country is just going to be flowers and peaceful. But again, it's 40 years of dictatorship. Add to that another 7 years of horrific incidents like these. So you have that.
Merci.
Oui, je voudrais juste vous dire.
Thank you. If I could just add something, in fact, Rio was in the filming of the film, but didn't appear in the final version. But he was one of the first to talk openly about this issue, because you should know that even mentioning the word rape is difficult for Libyans, and not just Libyans actually, for many cultures as well. I'm Sicilian, and it's the same thing in Sicily, I can assure you. But he was a young man who took part in the revolution in his country and was brave enough to come out and talk to his relatives, friends, colleagues about this and try to get these animation films up and running. And it might not seem a great deal for you, but for a Libyan, that is extremely important, that there are people like Rio who can talk about these issues and aren't afraid to do so, and aren't afraid to call a spade a spade. No one wants to talk about anus or sodomy. These are things that are very difficult to talk about. But he's one of those people who is brave enough to do it. And that's why I think he is a really symbol of hope for Libya.
Bravo. Merci.
Thank you. To come back to what Rio was saying about transitional justice, let's move on to Elisabeth Decrey, who is honorary president of WWoW, which you founded 20 years ago. You also president of the parliament in Geneva, and you have been working with rebels and militia groups for many years now, trying to ensure that they respect international humanitarian law. Could you describe your dialogue with armed groups? As we've seen in the film, Libya is now in a cycle of revenge, and it's very difficult to get out of that. But how do you actually discuss with militia groups of this kind? Thank you. Could I just say a couple of words about the film as well? Quite apart from what you said about the bravery and the importance of this film, I think it also raises two other important aspects. Firstly, it shows something different about Libya, because usually when we see Libya in the news, we get the impression that it's just about the migrants leaving Libya to try to get to Europe. But there are other things going on in Libya. There isn't just the tragedy of the migrants that seems to be a threat to Europe in some respects. And then there are other aspects in the film which are interesting. With the testimonies, we see rape being used against men, and this is always underreported. You read about this in NGO reports or in medical reports, but this time you have lawyers and prosecutors looking into this issue. And hopefully it will get to court. And I think that's another important aspect of this film. Coming back to WWoW and my work, it's an organization that works in conflict situations and only discusses with rebel or militia groups, opposition groups. That's the specific aspect of WWoW's work. And we work on humanitarian law negotiations. They're not peace negotiations. That's another issue. What we do is to try to make sure that these armed groups respect the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. We try to ensure that they know about it and that they respect it. So we have humanitarian agreements like concerning the demobilization of child soldiers, or dealing with people who've been the victims of sexual violence, or demining of areas that have been mined. So that's the work of WWoW, and that's what we've been doing for the past 20 years. It works with about 65 different armed groups today. And coming back to the issue of sexual abuse, yes, militias and armed groups are responsible, but there are also private military companies responsible for this type of crime. Unfortunately, there are also humanitarian actors. We've heard about some scandals recently, and by the army, and I think it's worth pointing that out. Regular armies are probably the major perpetrators of sexual abuse and violence. Yesterday at the Human Rights Council, Syria was discussed. There was a UN report which mentioned that the Syrian army uses rape and sexual violence as a weapon of war. The problem is, if you want to work with armed groups, states have to respect humanitarian law in the first place. Otherwise, because of this issue of revenge, you get into a vicious cycle, and there needs to be accountability for governments and states, which have all signed the Geneva Conventions. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And then, before you work with these armed groups, you need to do a lot of research. You need to work out, is it a tactic of theirs? Is it the leaders of these groups giving the order to carry out sexual abuse? Or is it just opportunistic rape? It doesn't make it any less serious, but it is different in terms of the approach that we can adopt to try and work with these armed groups to get them to change their behavior. Now, if you have any specific questions, I'll be delighted to reply to them. But just one further thing about Libya. Libya has a whole series of difficulties for an organization like Geneva Corps. Talking about sexual violence is always difficult, and that's something that many people have already said tonight. Talking about child soldiers and attacks on schools is something that's always easier to do. The second problem, though, is the complexity of the conflict in Libya. There are numerous militia groups, different chains of command. We don't know who we're talking about. One group could change and could join another group the next day. So it's very, very complicated. And it's difficult to identify who is giving the orders. But it looks like rape has been a strategy, and this makes it more difficult than dealing with opportunistic rapes. So that's why we have a specific approach in Libya. I can talk about that in greater detail later. It is a very complex situation there.
Cécile, tu voulais rajouter quelque chose?
Cécile, did you want to add something? Yes. Before coming to the questions, I wanted to say one thing. In my approach as a director, I always try to shorten the distances. Maybe Libya seems very far, but it's on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. And as it was said, you have hundreds and thousands of human beings, and this is all part of a very complex problem to which we have, through our political decision, contributed in a way. So I hope that this film today evening will help you to feel more close to persons living in a country which is subjected to many different diverging interests. Those people who would like to be with their families in their towns, and they have been separated from people they love. It's a situation which is very difficult for them to go through, and you are never happy to leave your home or to come out of yourself to shed some light on war crimes. So what I wanted to say, if such a film can be useful, is if you talk about this film, because it allows to understand the other. And this is what I'm trying to do through my films. And even after the debate, let's go on in the discussion. They came from far. She came from Pakistan. So take the opportunity of the presence of those persons here to understand better what we have just seen. So we come over to the questions. I open the floor, so we have light in. And we do not see you, so please make big gestures in order to get the microphone. And on the balcony, it's even worse. We don't see anything.
Madame.
This lady.
Merci. Je m'appelle Caroline.
Thank you. My name is Caroline. I just wanted to say that this is a remarkable film, and I'm really enjoying the discussion as well. It's a very striking film for me, because I was lucky enough to work in Bosnia in the 1990s, and I've also worked in Sierra Leone in the beginning of the 2000s, and then more recently in Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I'm always struck by the issue of accountability. And what I saw in Congo and Bosnia, and I think in Libya as well, you have the problem of widespread violence. Violence is so widespread and systematic that you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know who you should try to prosecute. There are so many cases, and everything is so complicated. You see that many of the victims are migrants who then become the perpetrators of crimes because they get the order to rape the Tawaga, and they are black as well. So it's Africans attacking Africans, and who should be prosecuted for these crimes at the end of the day? There's also the problem of militias. There are more and more militia groups. Many of them, it's easy to mix up. This is something that's happening in Congo as well. It's very difficult to identify them. And as a jurist, as a lawyer, if I wanted to make a complaint and prosecute, how would I do that? Because the violence is so widespread. Thank you. Let's take 2 or 3 questions before we try to get the panel to respond. I think I see a lady over there in the background.
Là. Là-bas au bout. Au bout. Non, pour la traduction.
Ah, pour la traduction, ça va pas.
Okay, I have a very simple question. At the beginning, you mentioned other legal procedures apart from the International Criminal Court. What are these other possibilities? Given the political situation in Libya, I find it hard to believe that there would be a domestic court. The International Criminal Court doesn't always function as well as it could. So if there are any other possibilities legally, then I would like to hear about them. Thank you. I think I see a gentleman here, and then a lady, and then we'll get some replies.
Voilà, merci.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank the filmmaker and Céline, Ramadan, and Ahmad, who also have been doing some exceptional work. They play a very important role. And hopefully this is just a beginning, and their work is going to be even more important in the future. It was difficult to begin with. We can see that. But hopefully it will bear fruit. They did this out of the goodness of their own heart, and hopefully you will be successful in your work for the sake of the people in the film. It's clear that there were crimes against humanity, war crimes, that have been committed by the regime which is now no longer in place, and there will be justice for those cases in the past. And this is very important. This is a thing you see very often, where there were dictatorships. You then see people trying to get revenge on the regime. There's also an ethnic aspect to this. There are different ethnic groups who are fighting each other and trying to humiliate each other. There is a breakup of society, and the wounds will last for many, many decades. I can hardly imagine what might happen in a few decades' time when people still have their wounds inside them. How will future governments in Libya try to address these problems. I think that's even more important. Justice is important, but we may see justice. But what about the future? And that's what's so serious, I think. And I think it's very dangerous for the future of Libya. Thank you. Madam, and then we'll give the floor back to the panelists.
Merci.
Bonjour, je suis Laura. Je suis bien de Mexique.
My name is Laura. I come from Mexico.
Pendant les films, on a souligné,
In the film,
on a évoqué les processus peut-être de génocide.
the word genocide was pronounced. It's a very strong word, and it requires a lot of research. Do you have some indications in the international law? And second question, how could we support your cause from the civil society point of view? Céline, so you are going to answer to a series of questions, and then we can start to answer see how the civil society can support this process and your work.
Ok, alors merci, ça fait beaucoup de questions.
Thank you. There were a lot of questions there. But I think I can just try to reply generally to all of your questions.
D'abord, la question effectivement de l'identification.
Firstly, the issue of trying to identify those responsible. Well, I created We Are Not Weapons of War because we are starting to talk about sexual violence in conflicts now, and a few years ago that wasn't the case. There is no specialized agency working on that issue. Well, there wasn't until We Are Not Weapons of War. I know Denis Mwakobe, who we work with in Congo. You mentioned Congo. And he's also created a foundation or a charity to try to learn the lessons from Congo. So I wonder why war rape is so important. Of course, rape is always serious, however it takes place. But at some point, you need to try to understand when you talk about war by rape, it is a tool for war, and that's different to opportunistic sexual violence that you mentioned. And that's a very important distinction. So that's why we need to talk about it. And we see that there is a lot of movement against sexual abuse generally in society now. And I think something we see very well in the film is that sexual abuse is a very effective tool in war. And that's something we see because it really destroys many generations, many communities, and it has a lasting effect. And that's why you see so many migrants fleeing their country after sexual violence. So you need to address the reasons for that, because in Sierra Leone this took place, in Liberia and in the DRC, you saw a whole culture of sexual violence that is no longer a weapon of war, because there is no war in the DRC anymore, but it's a culture. And there is a cycle of revenge that is created. This is a very important thing because the victim can become a perpetrator later on. If a migrant is forced to rape others, are they a perpetrator of the crime? I don't think they are. And I would go even further than that. What about the people who are doing that? Aren't they themselves victims of the system? And so to reply to your question, you need to try to identify these people, and that is possible. You can identify the people. Many people have been identified. In the DRC, there's been a mapping. Many people have been identified as perpetrators, but there are political issues at stake. And there are questions about what legal channels to go through. I apologize, I'm getting tired, so I may be losing the thread a little bit, but you need to take a different perspective. We're all thinking of Ahmad, and it's so moving to see him on the screen because it would have been so wonderful to have him here for you to meet, because He had nothing to do with the situation to begin with. He had no background in law, but he got involved. And he said to me, look, I don't really know what to say to these people. I don't know how to ask them the questions. But he learned on the job. And he can collect all of this information. That is a tremendous bonus. But legally speaking, the problem is it's such a mess. They collect so much information, but not all of it can be used. You have to analyze the information very carefully before you can actually use it, and that takes a lot of time. This is a phenomenon we see now in all conflicts. Rape is used in conflicts all over the world now. It's a global issue. Now, turning to other legal channels, there are other legal channels that you can go through. I was at the Rome negotiations. I fought for the International Criminal Court to be created, and it's so important that it does exist. It does have limitations, and we're seeing them increasingly. We see the limitations of the UN as well. But there are other legal channels. I think there was a whole evening on universal jurisdiction, for example. I'm sorry, there are complicated issues connected with security, but there are issues of universal jurisdiction that we are working on in Libya, in many countries. Identifying people at a very high political level. Obviously, that's very difficult to do because you can get yourself into trouble because these people are still in power. So they are in a position to protect themselves, and they've committed crimes. And I hope I haven't forgotten any of your questions, but there's also the issue of how this country is going to build a future on this basis, and that is a terrible problem. I think Ramadan could also talk about this, but justice is part of that process. Justice isn't the only thing. Of course, I'm a lawyer myself, but there need to be discussions in society. There needs to be transitional justice. But so much has already been done. So many terrible things have happened. It's very difficult to work out how to overcome this. And as to how civil society can help, Cécile's already mentioned this, but I think there are other things that need to be done, quite apart from justice. There are quicker, more disruptive solutions. That's something we could get into later as well. There are people from my team here. We are a very small organization, so we don't even have time to go and do fundraising. That's how busy we are. We all work on a pro bono basis, so we're going to need to find the time to fundraise because we don't have any funds left, and civil society can help. Joining the network doesn't necessarily mean funding, but we receive donations, and donations are very, very important, but people can help in other ways as well. We need experts, we need people who support us, we need people who talk about these issues. Cécile was talking about that. We need to look at the issue of sexual abuse from a new perspective. I try to look for solutions. I think we do need to talk about these issues. Maybe some people find that very difficult, but we do see in the film that some people don't even talk very much, but they do reveal enough about what they went through. So I think there needs to be a legal change in the way in which sexual abuse is dealt with in courts. So we need this new perspective. Victims shouldn't have to testify in witness hearings because it's too difficult for them. It's very traumatic for them to have to try to testify in that situation. So there need to be changes in the way in which witnesses have to testify. You need to give them other opportunities to remain anonymous, to testify using new technologies. And we're developing a tool that's going to be used in Libya there. So we could work with these people. Imad as well, who is in the field. So we try to help him from a distance because he tells us, well, I've met this particular person. We try to guide him in the investigative work through a kind of remote control. We share our expertise with him and say, look, you need to go back and see this person or that person. That's how we work, and that is much more effective. It takes a lot of time, but it can be very, very effective. So yes, the International Criminal Court isn't the only thing. Coming back to Libya, we should pressure the ICC because they need to work forward. Now, they say they don't have a budget, but if I had the budget of the ICC, then I think I'd be able to do a hell of a lot, because we do a hell of a lot already with a very, very low budget. So I think there needs to be a change in the institutions as well. The ICC needs to change its methods of work, its procedures, and we can try to encourage that process by advocating for change and talking about these issues.
Oui, pour la société civile. Ouais. J'ajouterais qu'en fait,
I would like to add that you have a very easy way to do something, because it's something you don't talk often about. So you organize events in libraries, in schools, because you have to talk about that. Because this country is still in chaos, the people are still inside. They cannot talk, and even if you have people on the field, it's a great problem because those people are dying slowly. So it's maybe a bit stupid, but I made the experience with my previous film. The more you talk about it, the more you have results. It's as easy as that.
شكرا للأسئلة وشكرا سيلين على الإجابات. يعني أجبت على نقاط كثيرة، لكن سؤال متعلق بالآليات اللي يمكن اتباعها. الاي سي سي هي أهم آلية. Universal Jurisdiction الاختصاص العالمي آلية مهمة، لكن في بعض الآليات الأخرى المساعدة واللي ممكن تساهم بشكل عالي ليس في المحاسبة بمعنى المحاسبة، ولكن في الحد من حجم الانتهاكات. أهمها لجان التحقيق. على مدار أكثر من سنتين نحاول مع مجلس حقوق الإنسان في حملات مناصرة متوالية من أجل إصدار قرار بلجنة تحقيق في الانتهاكات اللي تحدث في ليبيا. إلى الآن كل مجهوداتنا تقف أمام القرار السياسي. القرارات السياسية، ما يحدث في العواصم، البعثات الموجودة في مجلس حقوق الإنسان تمتنع عن الدعم وتكتفي بليبيا تحتاج إلى دعم فني وتقني. الدعم الفني والتقني سيجعل من انتهاكات مثل هذه الانتهاكات تزداد والدائرة تدور. أوكي.
Thank you very much for all these questions, and thank you to Céline for her answers. But I would like to raise some important points about the mechanism of justice. Of course, you have the ICC, you have the universal jurisdiction, but you have also other I was saying that you have other mechanism which cannot lead us to the goal to prosecute people, that is to prosecute people, but which allows us to helps us to limit the human rights violations. You have these investigation committees in the Council on Human Rights. They started to launch a campaign in order to adopt a decision of investigation in all the cases of violations which were committed in Libya. But the government is blocking everything, is stopping everything, and the representatives of the member state refrained of taking the decision, and so they take only decision in the material area, so the violations are more and more frequent.
المجتمع المدني. الحل في ليبيا يكمن في إعادة استقرار الدولة، توحيد المؤسسات، وقف الحرب، ووقف دعم الأطراف المتصارعة بكل أنواع الدعم. الإشكال الحقيقي هو أن الأطراف المتصارعة سواء كان على المستوى السياسي أو المستوى العسكري تتلقى دعم من المجتمع الدولي، من أطراف مختلفة، من دول مختلفة، في الوقت اللي تجد بعض الدول تدعم الطرفين في نفس الوقت. الأمر اللي يؤدي إلى سوء الحالة باستمرار في ليبيا، ولا يمكن معه بأي شكل من الأشكال الوصول إلى استقرار، إلى وقف انتهاكات، إلى بناء دولة، إلى عدالة انتقالية، مصالحات، بناء مؤسسات. الأمر غاية في الاستحالة مع هذا التعامل. الدعم الحقيقي بالإضافة إلى مسائل التمويل والدعم الفني للمجتمع المدني هو الضغط على الحكومات كمجتمع مدني من داخل الدول، حكومات الدول الفاعلة المؤثرة بشكل عالي جدا سواء كان على المستوى الدولي أو المستوى الإقليمي، وتدخلاتها اللي تزيد الحالة سوءا في ليبيا. لو المجتمع المدني في هذه الدول ينقل الصوت الحقيقي لما يحدث على الأرض وحجم الانتهاكات ومدى التأثير السلبي لهذه التدخلات، الدعم بالمال والدعم بالسلاح والغطاء السياسي، سيكون له أثر عالي جدا في وقف الانتهاكات، إعادة الاستقرار، إعادة بناء الدولة، والمضي قدما إلى مسائل مثل محاسبة المنتهكين، التعويض وجبر الضرر والمصالحات.
Besides the support of the civil society, the solution in Libya would be, of course, to build a solid state, very good institutions, and stop the war, and also stop the support to the different conflicting parties and the military factions, because we know that all these factions receive a political and military support from the international community and amongst of specific states, and some states give their support to the two opposed conflicting factions, armed groups. So the situation is getting worse and worse, and you won't be able to speak about stability, to build up a state of transitional justice and of solid institutions. So you need, with this support, to put a pressure on the governments and the important actors of the international community and the regional actors in order to stop this foreign ingerence in the country. You have to give this picture of all what is happening in the era of violence, political violence, in order to stop this vicious circle of violence, in order to build up a new state and to come to stability, and also to prosecute the criminal and to make accountable the responsible, and to start this process of reconciliation and to compensate for the victims. I would like to come back on the role of the civil society and to know if you could have a commission on truth and reconciliation in Libya. Do you think it would be possible? To have a what? To have a commission of truth and reconciliation. A commission on truth and reconciliation.
Oh yeah, no. I understand. Yes. It would be very difficult for Libya. I think Tunisia has taken a couple steps before us in terms of freedom of speech and personal liberties and things like that. But in Libya, it's a little bit behind in those terms. I mean, we were talking about, for those victims, it's even difficult to talk to one person. Imagine going live for the whole nation to watch. That would be very difficult. And add to that the familiar type of rape cases that we know is usually against women and against children, but we're talking about a very different type of crime here. And I was actually was going to add something else. I don't think that this is an ethnic or a racial issue. It's absolutely not. This is, I mean, when you have the right circumstances, when you know very well that there will be no prosecution for you and you have the absolute freedom to do anything you want, this has happened from almost all parties. This is not specific to Tawarga because Tawargans are black, and this is not specific to the Amazigh because the Amazigh are that. This has nothing to do with that. When the right circumstances are there, this happens. Yeah.
Merci. Il nous reste peu de temps.
Thank you. We don't have much more time. So, Elisabeth, if you want to add something before we have some more questions. Just to add to that, I think the major problem we have today is the silence surrounding this issue and impunity. So this is work that also needs to be done. We need to encourage people to come out and testify. And the international community needs to take responsibility as well and bring the perpetrators to justice. Now, as for civil society, well, Geneva Call works a lot with civil society, especially in very complex situations like in Libya, to try to raise awareness and ensure that civil society relays information. Because we don't want people to spy on each other all the time, but civil society, you have people in the field who know about situations and can relay information. As Imad was saying, civil society can play a very important role there. So we train them, and we train religious leaders as well. We tell them what they can do. They can play an important role. Geneva Call works a lot with faith leaders who can be very influential on some of these movements. And if I could just underscore what was said earlier about how sexual violence is leading many people to flee the country. I think that's actually the objective. That's the goal. It's to carry out systematic sexual abuse, to force people to flee, to destroy a whole group of people or a community, or drive them out of the country. That is a desired objective of this strategy.
Merci. N'est plus que partent et n'est plus accès à une scène politique.
And so they do not have access to a political role as well. Are there more questions maybe on the balcony? Because you didn't ask a question first. I don't see anybody raising a hand. The gentleman has a microphone already.
My name is Ahmed Kassira from Libya. I've been working in the field of human rights for over 20 years. I'd like to make just a little bit of a comment and then a question for Céline. First, Cécile, thank you for your film. I hope that the eventual release of it will generate national debate in Libya and greater awareness. We need to do that. We need that. And also, maybe it will, as your report did back in November, force national and international actors to, to take action. Because this is, from our experience, this is a very rampant and a serious problem that's going on in Libya. The other point is that I heard from the lady, the honorable lady from the Geneva Corps call, I couldn't call, that it is very complicated to actually, identify who's responsible. I beg to differ. From our work, it's really there, who is behind, because it's systematic. And, in the film, at the beginning of the film, mentioned that the ICC took an action last spring against the former head of the Internal Security Agency, ISA, for several war crimes, among them the rape. was abolished back in 2011 by a decision by the NTC, but it has been re-established in the east of Libya. And its former elements are now, they are working in different groups, different organizations, security organizations. And quite frankly, from our field work, people are from these organizations specifically in different groups, both east and west, are behind. Some of them are behind some of these acts. It's systemic. We even, the methods, west and east is the same, very quite similar. So that is the idea. The point raised about the reconciliation in Libya, truth and reconciliation. There is a difference between, coming and speaking it in public forum. That's one part. Probably sometime we will come to it. But truth and reconciliation, there is a committee that was established in 2011 by the NTC, but since 2014, since the breakdown of the political process and the escalation of violence, it has become like paralyzed. Now we've been working with both parties. There is a member of the House of Parliament in the East, and from the High State of the High Council of State from the West. Both of them are working together with the fact-finding mission agency to actually give it support in order to resume its work, at least in documenting the atrocities. Céline in the film has concentrated on your investigation, or at least that's been only on cases in the West. Are you, your organization, are you going into that to also look into cases in the West, in the east of Libya, cases also against migrants? Because there is a rampant, also migrants themselves are victims of rape in Libya. That is the question.
She needs funding, but yes. She needs... Yeah, I need money. No, seriously, yes. Yes, the answer is yes. Okay, the film is, momentum, and it's the beginning, and it's... but yes, we are working on all parts, so we don't have a specific priority on anything, and there is there is a big need. Me, the way I see it is, okay, first of all, I'm a lawyer, and you're right about the commission, but I'm not looking at politics, or I don't even have time for that. But the need that is urgent for Libya is a real, not that is not real, but a proper documentation, so we have a clear idea of what is happening. And that's why this movie is very important, because that reveals part of something. Also, I wanted to say I could do a masterclass on sexual violence in conflict, but this is not the purpose. But yes, sexual violence in conflict, it was good to remind it. It has an objective, very, very clear. In each country, you have a very specific objective. So just to, so it's not only a question of consequence. Everything it's very thought. But yes. And that's it. Was there another question? So yes, no. So I will. So we will.
In fact, I do think, I don't know if everyone speaks English, more or less. Okay, there is a translation. I think that even for Libya right now, if I may say so, it's important to make everyone understand, including people inside of Libya, the extent of the violations and that the fact that no one is spared. Because I think that's the only condition with at this very single condition you will be able to discuss all together. When everyone is guilty, then there is a ground for discussion in a way. Okay, so it's the first step towards a transitional process, and that's why, in fact, yes, I think the team will continue working, and with the help of many others exiled Libyan communities who are gathering elements of proofs all over Europe right now as we speak. Everyone needs to reunite with one goal. Okay, let's make this happen. Let's put war crimes on the spotlights, so that finally the international community cannot pretend that they're not making deal with war criminals. Okay, because we're talking about this. Maybe someday someone that we're currently discussing with, not to name him the General Haftar, will be recognized as a war criminal. What will we do then? What will we do? We will have shaken hands with the Libyan Karadzic, with someone who will be convicted someday. So this is a huge responsibility for Europe to know who they're talking to. Okay, so Libya, okay, it's complicated, but so for the Libyans to understand that everyone has something to deal with, and maybe spread the word about more violations. I know it seems crazy in a period in which everyone tries to reconcile, but there is no way sweeping it under the carpet will help with reconciliation. Sorry, yes?
Sorry, but just to add on that point, but it's exactly the problem, no? That they know with whom they're dealing with, and they're not doing anything, and they're making deals with them to actually keep people in detention centers.
Since I'm Italian, half French, I can answer, because I feel responsible for minitisk behavior in Sabrata, because we're talking about this, about Italians bringing money to a very well-known trafficker just to withhold migrants and not to let them go across the sea. So. Yes, it's an Italian specialty. I know we're very good at it. No, but sorry for this humour noir. We sometimes need it, as you might understand after what you've seen. But they know, but at the same time, they think that you have to deal. It's the realpolitik. The question is, you have to deal with what you have, and this crazy. International diplomacy principle is just getting us into situations that we will, with a huge amount of difficulty, get out of. Because currently now, we're funding one of the biggest mafias of the other side of the Mediterranean. A mafia that feeds on human lives with no limit. And the political decisions we're making is not only sending millions of people to that, but is wrecking a country completely. So I'm ashamed in a way. I don't think we're the only one responsible. Let's be clear about that. But I'm ashamed. Well, yeah, everybody's.
So since we've already completely destroyed the timing, one last one, maybe from all the panelists. You.
Well, first of all, or maybe the last thing is, I've lost a part of my voice because of screaming about this topic so much. Not true.
That's the smoking.
See, have you seen how many times this guy smokes?
I know.
Dealing with this kind of stuff is very difficult. Yeah, he quit, so give him a round of applause, I guess. No, again, thank you guys very much. Thank you for caring about this, and I know that some of you will, maybe this will be a life-changing experience for them, and some of you will walk out of this cinema and completely forget about the whole subject. But you know, whenever you hear the word Libya, don't think immigrants or just rape. Think that there are normal human beings there who are trying to build a country. And thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now I'll speak in English. Finally. No, really thank you so much, all of you. When I came to Geneva, I thought I'll meet a few people, fewer than you. I'll speak less than what I have been done here. Hear questions more easier than what I heard. That's mean there's really people like caring about Libya, caring about what we are doing. Thank you a lot, and I have to make apologize for Cécile, because I really 2 years she's suffering a lot from me, and thank you a lot about all what you have been done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Voilà, je vous remercie encore d'être venu et d'être resté.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for staying for the debate. It was really important for all of us to have questions and responses from the audience, and we can continue to discuss these issues outside after this debate. I would never have imagined a couple of years ago to have Ramadan, Rio and Céline here on a stage in Geneva to talk about these issues, these crimes that we couldn't even name to begin with. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to have to continue this discussion outside of the room because there's another film going to be shown in this room. So thank you to the panelists and the translators and the interpreters. Thank you to you all.